Hello, and welcome back to Hope is Kindled, the podcast where we search through the shadows of literature, history, and memory for sparks of light that can carry us forward. From the very beginning, when we first sat with Gregor Samsa and the Metamorphosis, we have not turned away from difficulty. Kafka showed us alienation, despair, and silence, and yet, even there, we found a glimmer of hope in the honesty of naming our loneliness. On the road with Kerouac, we traced the restless hunger of the human heart, the exhilaration and the emptiness of chasing freedom. It reminded us that sometimes hope lives not in the destination, but in the journey itself, in the loyalty of friendship, and in the courage to keep searching. And in Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, we wrestled with temptation, beauty, corruption, and consequence. Wilde's words showed us that hope survives even in the warning, that to see clearly the dangers of influence, vanity, and misplaced desire is itself a path toward wisdom. These early episodes taught us that hope is not obvious. It hides in difficult places, in mistakes, in suffering, and in self-discovery. Which is why today, we turn to Ernest Hemingway. Few writers have spoken so plainly about the brutality of life and the endurance of the human spirit. Hemingway once wrote,
"The world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at the broken places."
It is one of those lines that resonates like an old bell, somber, unflinching, and yet quietly hopeful. Charles Dickens, many decades earlier, gave us a softer echo of that same truth.
Suffering has been stronger than all other teaching, and has taught me to understand what your heart used to be. I have been bent and broken, but, I hope, into a better shape.
Both men speak across time with the same recognition. Suffering is inevitable, but in its wake, something can emerge. Sometimes that something is resilience. Sometimes it is compassion. And sometimes it is simply the stubborn act of continuing on. My first experience with Hemingway wasn't a book pulled from a shelf, but an audio cassette of The Old Man and the Sea from the library. I was hooked, literally, to the rhythm of his sentences, the clarity of his words, the weight of silence in what was left unsaid. Hemingway knew how to use restraint like a master film editor. I felt every moment, every pause, every perfectly chosen word. Later, I picked up The Snows of Kilimanjaro with its haunting meditation on regret. I read Carlos Baker's Hemingway, a biography that gave me a fuller sense of the man, the myth, the wounds, and the contradictions. I tried In Our Time, which became, to me, my least favorite of his works, but even there I saw the seedlings of the voice that would later define him. It would be years before I finally took on For Whom the Bell Tolls, and when I did, I found a novel that pressed directly into questions of sacrifice, love, and mortality, the questions Hemingway had carried with him his whole life. When we read For Whom the Bell Tolls right now, in our time, in our world, it speaks less as a war novel and more as a meditation on the stakes of living with integrity when everything seems to collapse around you. Robert Jordan's mission is doomed from the start, but Hemingway isn't asking us to measure his success in tactical victories. The true measure is in the choices he makes, the bonds he forges, and the hope he finds in love and loyalty, even in the shadow of certain death. The book reminds us that hope is not the absence of despair, nor a guarantee of survival. It is the stubborn decision to believe that one's actions, however small, are tied to the lives of others, our joys, our suffering, our fates. Hope lies in knowing that nothing we do is wasted because it resonates in the lives of others. As a culmination of our quest for hope, For Whom the Bell Tolls suggests that even in the most violent, fragmented, and uncertain times, the act of loving, of standing for something, of keeping faith with those beside you, is itself a form of triumph. It tells us that hope does not always roar in victory. Sometimes it whispers in sacrifice, in endurance, in the simple grace of giving one's life meaning by how it is lived. Reading Hemingway now, it's impossible not to hear his refrain echoed decades later in David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas and its film adaptation. Where Hemingway insists through dawn that the bell tolls for thee, Cloud Atlas unfurls the same truth across centuries and voices. Our lives are not our own. Each kindness, each betrayal, each act of courage or cowardice ripples outward into futures we will never see. Robert Jordan's doomed mission embodies the immediacy of solidarity. His sacrifice matters because it binds him to the men and women fighting beside him in that very moment. Cloud Atlas, by contrast, offers the long view of solidarity, that what we choose today may shape the destiny of strangers centuries from now. Yet the heart of both works is the same. We matter because we are bound together. Placed side by side, Hemingway and Mitchell remind us that hope is not solitary. It does not survive in isolation, but in connection through bonds forged in love, in conscience, in sacrifice. The bell tolls for all, and the Atlas of Clouds reminds us that even drifting forms are part of one sky. Hemingway and Mitchell stand at very different ends of the literary spectrum, one stripped to the bone in style, the other layered and kaleidoscopic. Yet when we place For Whom the Bell Tolls beside Cloud Atlas, we find they are reaching for the same truth, that no life exists in isolation. In Hemingway's novel, Robert Jordan's sacrifice is immediate and local. His life is tied to the fate of his comrades in the Spanish mountains, to the fragile hope of a cause that may not survive. His courage is not measured in victory but in solidarity, in giving his life meaning by binding it to others in their moment of need. The bell tolls because his death belongs not just to him, but to all of us. In Cloud Atlas, this same truth is unfolded across centuries. We follow Adam Ewing on a 19th century voyage, Louisa Ray uncovering conspiracies in the 1970s, Sonmi Tilda 451, awakening to resistance in a dystopian future, and I, Zachary, surviving in a world after collapse. Their lives never directly intersect, yet each one reverberates in the next. A journal, a film, a testimony. Amid threads of memory and story carry their choices forward. Where Hemingway shows us the short echo of solidarity, Mitchell shows us the long echo of consequence, that what we do, even unseen, will resurface in lives far removed from our own. Together, these works insist on a shared responsibility. Hemingway says, "Act with integrity now, because you are bound to those beside you." Mitchell says, "Act with integrity always, because you are bound to those who will inherit your world." One places hope in the courage of the present moment. The other places hope in the endurance of human memory and story. But both assure us that no kindness, no sacrifice, no act of conscience is ever wasted. So when we read them together, the picture becomes whole. Hope is solidarity in the moment, and solidarity across time. Whether in a Spanish forest at the end of a rifle or in a futuristic court where a clone finds her voice, the truth remains the same. Our lives are not our own, and the flame we carry becomes part of the fire that warms generations yet to come. If Papillon taught us hope through defiance, if Proust showed us hope in memory, if To Kill a Mockingbird gave us hope in conscience, Hemingway's great war novel gives us hope in solidarity, that we belong to one another, and that the flame we carry is never only our own. Now, we take a look at the man himself. I truly enjoyed Carlos Baker's book on Hemingway and encourage you to go and read it for yourself. It gives just the right impressions that make you want to keep reading more. Ernest Hemingway lived like one of his characters, on the edge, in pursuit of truth as he saw it. Born in Oak Park, Illinois in 1899, he grew up loving nature, hunting, and the outdoors. He volunteered in World War I as an ambulance driver, where he was wounded and nearly killed. That brush with death never left him. It haunted his writing and shaped his obsession with courage under fire. Hemingway reported on wars, hunted in Africa, fished in Cuba, and lived in Paris during the Lost Generation. He carried himself like a warrior, but inside he bore fragility, depression, and wounds both cross, physical and emotional. His life ended tragically by his own hand in 1961, a reminder that even those who write of resilience are not immune to despair. Yet his legach, the voice, the stories, the stripped-down prose, endures. The old man and the sea. Santiago, the old fisherman, fights a marlin far larger than his strength. His body is broken, but his dignity remains intact. This novel distills Hemingway's philosophy. Success is not always about winning, but about enduring with grace and refusing to surrender. For whom the bell tolls, sect during the Spanish Civil War, Robert Jordan's final hours are not a defeat, but a choice, to sacrifice himself for others, to find meaning even in the face of certain death. Here, Hemingway confronts mortality head-on, but also highlights the nobility of love and loyalty. A Farewell to Arms. This novel places love against the backdrop of war, showing how fragile hope can be. The inevitability of loss does not diminish the power of having loved at all. The Snows of Kilimanjaro, a writer on his deathbed recalls wasted potential and regrets. It is a meditation on how to live while one still can, a reminder that hope lies in choosing to act before it is too late. When we place Hemingway alongside other authors, his voice becomes part of a larger chorus. Dickens reminds us that suffering can make us better shaped. Dostoevsky, in The Brothers Karamazov, insists that even in doubt, cruelty, and despair, redemption is possible, that the light can be found in Alyosha's compassion even as Ivan wrestles with darkness. Homer's Odyssey tells us that brokenness is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a return home, where endurance and love outlast even the gods' trials. And then there is Marcus Aurelius, who centuries before Hemingway wrote in his Meditations that pain, loss, and ingratitude are inevitable, but the citadel of one's mind can remain intact. Like Hemingway, Marcus saw life as a battlefield where the truest victory is endurance with dignity. When we talk about Ernest Hemingway, we can't ignore the elephant in the room. For all his stylistic brilliance, the clipped prose, the iceberg theory, the raw evocation of war and loss, Hemingway has long been a lightning rod for feminist critique. Some see his portrayals of women as limited, his characters drawn more as reflections of male needs than as fully realized human beings. Others point to the cult of machismo he cultivated in life and art, suggesting that it reinforced narrow, even harmful, ideas of gender. These critiques matter, because part of what we do here is not just celebrate great books, but also wrestle with their blind spots and ask what they mean for us today. Many of Hemingway's female characters are written as dependent on men, existing largely in relation to male heroes. They often fall into narrow categories: the nurturer who supports the male protagonist, the temptress or sexual object, or the idealized love interest. In novels like The Sun Also Rises or A Farewell to Arms, women are central to the plot, but often lack full inner lives compared to the men. This imbalance has led critics to see his work as reinforcing patriarchal norms. Hemingway cultivated a public image of hypermasculinity: big game hunting, bullfighting, boxing, war reporting. His writing often valorizes stoicism, physical courage, and emotional restraint. While powerful as a style, this can suggest that real men must suppress vulnerability and that women's roles are secondary or peripheral to the main action. Feminist critics argue this enshrines a limited, gendered view of strength. Beyond the page, Hemingway's tumultuous relationships with women, 4 marriages, complicated affairs, and sometimes domineering behavior color how feminist scholars read his work. His personal machismo has been seen as seeping into his artistic voice, making it harder to separate the writer from his texts. That said, it's important to acknowledge that Hemingway is not monolithic. Some feminist scholars point out that his portrayals of women, while limited, also reveal male fragility and dependence. Brett Ashley in The Sun Also Rises is independent and sexually liberated, even if her freedom is judged harshly. Catherine Barclay in A Farewell to Arms is criticized for being idealized, but she also exposes how war strips men of control and drives them into dependence on love. And yet, literature is never fixed. It's alive in the way we read it. To recognize where Hemingway falls short is also to recognize how far we have come and how much more we can see when we widen the lens. That's the hopeful task of criticism, not to silence voices from the past, but to bring them into dialogue with the present. With that in mind, let's turn to our next segment, where we'll look at how other writers, sometimes from very different traditions, have taken up the themes of identity, justice, and empathy in ways that expand the conversation Hemingway began. Now, if we turn to Doctor Who, we find a curious resonance. In Heaven Sent, the 12th Doctor faces his own unendurable trial. For billions of years, he pounds his fists against a wall of diamond, inch by inch, carving a way through grief and isolation. It is the ultimate expression of Hemingway's idea: the world broke him, and yet he was strong in the broken places, strong enough to endure, strong enough to rise again. And yet, there is a complication. One might argue the doctor wasn't broken and heaven sent. He never revealed what he knew, or what he didn't know, about Clara's fate. Some say he did this for love. Unlike Hemingway's Santiago, who accepts the marlin will be devoured, the doctor refuses to confess his despair. His silence is itself an act of love. He bears the suffering alone, hidden, as though to speak it aloud would diminish Clara's memory. Hemingway's heroes endure openly. They bleed, they stumble, they confess their pain. But the doctor endures in secrecy. He becomes a fortress of silence, destroying himself a billion times over without letting the universe glimpse the crack. And here lies a strange kind of hope. The hope that love can be so deep it resists even words, that loyalty can be so fierce it is carried in silence. Hemingway might have admired this restraint. He might have seen in the doctor not a man unbroken, but a man whose cracks were too sacred to expose. In this way, the doctor and Hemingway walk the same road by different means. Both teach us that suffering will come, that the world will break us. But they also remind us that from the fragments, strength can emerge. For some, that strength is found in confession, in acknowledging the wound. For others, it is in silence, in carrying a love so profound it cannot be spoken. Either way, hope endures. Together, these voices form a bridge across time. Suffering breaks us, but in different ways. Each author suggests that the fractures can reveal strength, beauty, or new purpose. Hemingway joins this chorus, not with lofty philosophy or moralizing, but with stripped-down honesty. You are broken, yes, but you are still standing. What, then, is the hope we learn from Hemingway? It is not a sentimental hope. It is not the naive brightness that pretends things will work out easily. Hemingway's hope is forged in fire, in the knowledge that life will wound you, but that you can endure with dignity. Santiago in The Old Man and the Sea teaches us that success is not measured by the marlin on the shore, but by the fight in the human spirit. Robert Jordan, in For Whom the Bell Tolls, shows us that love can blossom even in war, and that sacrifice for others can give meaning to mortality. Catherine and Frederick in A Farewell to Arms remind us that love, though fleeting, is worth every risk. The unnamed writer in The Snows of Kilimanjaro warns us not to waste our days, but also assures us that even regret has meaning, for it awakens us to what matters. Hope here is not about avoiding brokenness. It is about what we choose to carry forward when brokenness comes. For young readers today, and for all of us, Hemingway's lesson is urgent. Technology may change, wars may look different, but the need for endurance, courage, and dignity never disappears. This episode does not attempt a full textual analysis of Hemingway. Instead, it hints at his greatness, admires the craftsmanship of his prose, and places his work in conversation with the other voices we've explored on this podcast. Our focus, as always, has been to search for the reasons to be hopeful and positive in what remains of his legacy. And, if there is one takeaway, it is the inspiration to read Hemingway for yourself, guided in part by Carlos Baker's illuminating biography, which reminds us that behind the myth of Hemingway lies a writer whose art continues to challenge, provoke, and endure. When I think back to that first audio cassette in the library, I realize why I was hooked. Hemingway didn't write about worlds free of pain. He wrote about people who carried pain with courage, people who showed that even in brokenness, there is strength. And so we leave with his words echoing, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at the broken places. In those broken places, hope takes root. If you are grieving, let the story hold it. If you are tired, let the story rest beside you. If you are beginning again, let the story name your courage. Because the story you are living really is happening. And one day, when details thin and years do what years do, its meaning will still be here, in someone's hands, on someone's lips. Not gone, transformed. And here's the most beautiful thing. Literature is not a dead monument. It is alive, changing with every new reader who steps into its world. Think of the never-ending story. The childlike empress can only be saved when Bastian calls her by a new name. Stories, too, are reborn when we name what they've missed and imagine what they might still become. That's what feminist critique and all forms of thoughtful criticism offer us. Not destruction, but renewal. Or, to borrow from Rob Zombie, we're not here to bury the dead. We're here to dig them up and make them dance. So, with that spirit, let's move into our next segment, where we explore how other writers have expanded, challenged, and deepened the conversation about identity, justice, showing us that hope is never finished, because life itself is never finished. Every time we think a story has ended, it spills into another, just as Bastian discovers in the never-ending story, or, as the Doctor reminds us, that every ending, every regeneration, and new life is just a doorway to the next adventure. Hope isn't a static possession, it's a practice, a discipline, a flame that has to be carried forward. It's never finished because injustice isn't finished. Struggle isn't finished. Our need for compassion, courage, and vision isn't finished. But that's the gift. Hope regenerates. It reignites in each generation, each reader, each conversation. It's why a line in Proust, or Papillon's cry of defiance, or Scout Finch's childlike honesty still stirs us today. One of the reasons I felt the need to jot these thoughts down in my original WordPad file advice for my boys on my phone was to remind myself, to inform them, and now to help you see, that hope is not something we find once and keep forever. It's something we kindle, and rekindle, and rekindle, and reignite, because it must always be lived. For now, and forevermore, good journey.